So in Hamilton County, Ohio, there's this 15-year veteran of conservative politics, and she basically just watched her entire grassroots team tear itself apart last week.
Right, just completely fractured. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't over a controversial new policy or, I don't know, a local candidate endorsement.
No, not at all. They completely split over a piece of merchandise, specifically a hat with a date on it.
A date that, well, technically speaking, shouldn't be legally possible, which is exactly why that specific hat is acting like a massive lightning rod across the political landscape right now.
Yeah, it really is. So welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to, kind of cut through all the daily noise and explore the immense constitutional and cultural friction surrounding presidential term limits. We are zeroing in on the really intense debate sparked by recent rhetoric regarding a potential fourth term for Donald Trump.
And to guide our exploration today, we're drawing from a highly detailed set of excerpts from an article published by URBTNews. It's called The Constitutional Battle Over Presidential Term Limits.
Right, and we're also weaving in some recent data from a time polling report, plus some really interesting legislative analysis from the independent political outlet, NOCHIES.
Exactly. Together, these sources map out both the rigid legal realities of this issue and, the deeply human elements of this national conversation.
But before we jump into all that, we do need to take a brief, mandatory pause and speak directly to you, the listener. The source material we are unpacking today involves incredibly politically charged content.
Yeah, it touches on some very intense perspectives crossing the entire political spectrum, involving both left-wing and right-wing viewpoints.
So we want to clearly declare right here at the top that we are not taking sides, we are not endorsing any of the viewpoints we discussed today, and we're absolutely not pushing a political agenda of any kind.
Right. Our sole purpose as your guides is to impartially report on the facts, the history, and the ideas contained in the provided source material. We're just here to help you understand the underlying mechanics of this national debate, examining it structurally rather than ideologically.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly grasp what is happening with this debate, we have to look past the theoretical arguments happening in the halls of Washington, D.C., and actually look at the reality on the ground.
Because when national political theater hits Main Street, the consequences become concrete incredibly fast.
Yeah, think of political rhetoric like a rock thrown into a pond, right? Washington is the initial splash, but people out in the country are the ones actually dealing with the ripples on the shore.
That is a perfect way to describe it. And the URBT News article captures this phenomenon by focusing on Sarah Jenkins. She's the veteran conservative grassroots organizer in Hamilton County that we mentioned earlier.
Right, she's been doing this a long time.
For nearly 15 years. She has been the absolute definition of a political foot soldier, knocking on doors, organizing phone banks, rallying local volunteers.
Just totally committed to the ground game.
Exactly. She's fundamentally committed to the Republican Party's platform and has spent her life building this really robust local volunteer group.
And then the Trump 2028 hats showed up at her field office.
Right. And instantly, her cohesive unit just cleanly split down a generational and ideological fault line.
Wow.
Yeah, the younger volunteers in her group were totally energized by it. They loved the merchandise.
Well, sure, to that demographic, wearing a 2028 hat is viewed as this bold, defiant declaration of Trump's legacy, right?
Yes, exactly. It was a statement of loyalty. It signals this aggressive future ambition that basically refuses to be boxed in by traditional political boundaries.
But then you contrast that with the older volunteers in Sarah's group. These are individuals who came of age politically under a completely different paradigm.
Oh, completely different. They have spent decades advocating for the core conservative principle of strictly limited executive power.
Right. So for them, a president pushing past established boundaries isn't a sign of strength. It's a massive red flag.
Exactly. And the article explicitly notes that these older volunteers were deeply unsettled. The hats represented a direct challenge to the institutional guardrails they had spent their lives defending.
So is this tension just a spat over campaign merchandise? Or is it fundamentally changing how communities view the presidency itself?
It is definitely fundamentally changing things. What's fascinating here is how quickly a national talking point became a local crisis. When her volunteers started demanding to know if a fourth presidential term was actually legally possible, Sarah Jenkins found herself completely paralyzed.
Because what do you even say to that?
Right. She couldn't provide an answer that satisfied both the populist energy of her younger members and the strict constitutionalism of her older members.
That is such a tough spot.
And the friction became so intense that several of her most reliable long-term volunteers just quit. They walked away entirely, leaving her to try and rebuild a shattered team.
Man. I think about it like an immune system response. Washington frequently injects foreign, boundary-pushing ideas into the national bloodstream, and usually the political body just processes it.
Right, it just filters it out.
But in this case, the idea of a fourth term acts like a highly disruptive foreign agent. The local institutionalists, like Sarah's older volunteers, function as the political immune system. They attack the idea to protect the unwritten norms of their environment.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the resulting clash causes a massive fever. The fever, in this instance, is the complete fracturing of a previously unified grassroots team.
I like that analogy, and that tension points to something much larger than a spat over hats. Sarah's dilemma proves that this debate is no longer about a single election cycle. It's evolved into a fundamental clash between populism and constitutionalism.
Totally.
It is a debate over whether the presidency should be defined by the sheer force and mandate of popular support in the present moment, or constrained by the rigid legal boundaries written by generations past.
And that localized friction in Ohio perfectly mirrors the broader national divide over how to interpret the president's rhetoric in the first place. Across the country, voters are grappling with a president who openly muses about remaining in power beyond the established limits. And the interpretations of those musings are just totally polarized.
Yeah, because Trump's supporters largely view these fourth-term comments as simple trademark humor. The URBT news article points out that he has a well-documented history of deploying hyperbole specifically to dominate the news cycle.
Oh, absolutely. He's a master at that.
The source cites a brilliant tactical example, actually, when he broke his silence on President Biden's diagnosis. By using unexpected, amplified rhetoric, he completely captivated the public and forced the media to cover his narrative.
Right. So his base sees the term limit talk as an extension of that exact playbook. It's theatrical, it's designed to agitate his critics, and they just relish the reaction it provokes.
Oh, they love the reaction. But then you have the critics who argue that treating these statements as mere jokes is a really dangerous mistake.
Yeah.
And this isn't just some fringe worry either. The sources cite a recent Time report highlighting how deeply divided the electorate is over this rhetoric.
Polling data is pretty stark, right?
Very stark. While a loyal base is eagerly embracing the idea of rewriting the rules, a clear majority of American adults strongly disapprove of any attempts to bypass traditional constitutional boundaries. The data reveals a highly anxious electorate.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. If this is purely political humor designed to agitate critics, why is it causing such measurable, serious friction in polls like the Time report?
Well,
why are dedicated volunteers in Ohio quitting their posts over a joke?
if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to recognize that humor and hyperbole in high-level politics rarely exist in a vacuum. Historically, they serve as trial balloons.
Testing the waters.
Exactly. They test the waters to measure the electorate's appetite for shifting democratic norms. The polling in that Time report doesn't just reflect a momentary reaction to a punchline, it reflects a deep-seated national anxiety over the limits of executive power in the 21st century.
Right.
Voters are highly attuned to the fact that institutional boundaries are being actively tested.
So to really understand why modern voters are experiencing such acute anxiety about these boundaries today, we kind of have to look back at why the boundaries were built in the first place. Because, they weren't always there.
No, they weren't.
For the first 150 years of the American Republic, presidential term limits were not codified in law at all.
Right. They were governed entirely by behavioral custom. George Washington established the two-term precedent simply by stepping down after his second term.
Right, because he believed a peaceful transfer of power was essential to preventing a monarchy.
Exactly. And for a century and a half, subsequent presidents respected that unwritten rule, recognizing its importance to the stability of the republic.
It's like an unwritten rule in a neighborhood game that everyone followed out of politeness until one player didn't, so they finally had to chisel it into the rule book.
That's exactly what happened. And that paradigm shifted massively during the twin crises of the Great Depression and World War II, when Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected to 4 consecutive terms.
Which is just wild to think about now.
It is. But the electorate at the time was terrified of changing leadership during a global conflict. But Roosevelt's unprecedented length of tenure, combined with a massive expansion of executive power to manage the war and the economy, it terrified lawmakers.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
Congress deeply feared the creation of a perpetual presidency. They realized that relying on a gentleman's agreement was just no longer sufficient when facing modern geopolitical pressures.
Right, so Congress acted. They passed the 22nd Amendment, which the states officially ratified in 1951. And this didn't just suggest a limit. It legally codified the two-term limit into the Constitution.
It created a rigid, unyielding barrier.
And that historical barrier brings us directly to the current moment. Donald Trump was elected to the presidency in 2016 and again in 2024, which means he is currently serving his second elected term.
Right.
Under the codified law, the 22nd Amendment, he legally cannot seek another.
But the modern context complicates this tremendously. The URBT News article notes that this administration is pursuing massive, aggressive policy initiatives. The source specifically cites controversial foreign policy moves, like the second phase of Trump's Gaza peace plan.
And let's explore why that specific detail matters. Massive geopolitical treaties, economic restructuring, or multi-phase peace plans, they cannot physically be executed within a ticking 4-year clock.
No, they take decades.
Decades of delicate diplomacy and implementation. When a leader is in the middle of executing world-altering policies, a rigid constitutional deadline feels like an arbitrary obstacle.
Yes, exactly.
His supporters inevitably start questioning whether a rule written in 1951 should still apply to their modern ambitions and the massive scale of 21st century governance.
The ticking clock basically becomes the enemy of progress in the eyes of the administration.
So what does this all mean for a modern president with massive policy ambitions who feels constrained by the clock?
It means they hit a wall that was built for this exact scenario. The 22nd Amendment was purposefully engineered to serve as a rigid barrier against overwhelming popularity and unchecked executive ambition. It was designed to ensure that the office always remains bigger than the occupant, no matter how popular that occupant might be or how critical their policy goals seem at the moment.
Right.
The framers of that amendment prioritized the long-term health of the republic over the short-term execution of any single administration's agenda.
But a rigid historical barrier in today's political climate is practically an invitation for a legal clash. And that is exactly what we are witnessing. We have lawmakers actively trying to find ways to change or navigate around the rules, colliding head-on with legal scholars who point to the absolute unforgiving text of the Constitution.
Yeah, and the source material highlights this clash by looking closely at Representative Andy Ogles from Tennessee.
Right.
He has introduced a proposed amendment attempting to create a legal workaround. His proposal would allow presidents who served non-consecutive terms to seek a third election.
Okay, wait. How does a non-consecutive term magically bypass the words elected more than twice? I mean, Section 1 of the 22nd Amendment states very clearly, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice.
Yes, it does.
If someone was elected in 2016 and elected in 2024, a 2028 run would be election number 3.
Mm-hmm.
How is Ogles legally justifying this loophole?
Well, the legal gymnastics involved are pretty fascinating. The argument attempts to differentiate between the strict text of the law and what proponents claim is the original intent of the law.
Okay.
Proponents of the loophole argue that the 22nd Amendment was specifically drafted in response to FDR's 4 consecutive terms. Therefore, they argue, the spirit of the amendment was designed to prevent continuous, uninterrupted, perpetual rule.
I see where this is going.
Right. So by having a break in service, a non-consecutive term, they argue the philosophical intent of the amendment is satisfied because the presidency was briefly returned to the opposition.
Wow. I can hear mainstream legal scholars tearing their hair out over that interpretation.
Oh, they absolutely are. Mainstream legal experts, particularly strict textualists, reject this argument entirely. They point out that the language leaves zero room for creative interpretation regarding intent.
Yeah, it doesn't say consecutive.
Exactly. The text does not say consecutive. It says twice. Scholars argue that attempting to bypass this rule based on a convoluted interpretation of intent would spark an unprecedented constitutional crisis. It would undermine the bedrock foundational principles of textual law in American democracy.
Which makes me question the underlying strategy here. If the constitutional language leaves zero room for creative interpretation, is Representative Ogles' proposal just a piece of political theater? Or is there a genuine legislative strategy at play here?
This raises an important question about how modern politics actually functions. We really have to distinguish between legal viability and political messaging.
Okay.
The independent political outlet Notice This analyzed this effort and noted something critical. They pointed out that Representative Ogle's resolution is genuinely struggling to find co-sponsors in Congress. It has no real legislative momentum.
Right, it's pretty isolated.
However, Notice concludes that the bill has been wildly successful in a completely different arena. It has successfully amplified the debate within conservative circles.
Wow, so even a failed bill shifts the Overton window. By putting it on paper and submitting it to Congress, it legitimizes the conversation. It forces people to talk about it as a legislative possibility rather than just a rally slogan.
Exactly. The strategy is about normalizing the idea. If bypassing the text isn't a viable option without triggering a massive crisis, the conversation naturally turns to the only legitimate path forward, changing the text itself.
And that brings us to the math. The brutal, unforgiving math of the United States Constitution. Yep. To change the text, we have to talk about Article V.
Yes.
The framers intentionally designed the amendment process to be extraordinarily difficult. They wanted the Constitution to be insulated from the fleeting passions of any single political era.
Very true. To legally pursue a fourth term, the Constitution has to be amended, and there are only two pathways to do it. Pathway 1 requires a 2/3 supermajority vote in both the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Which, I mean, getting 2/3 of modern Washington to agree on what to have for lunch is a miracle, let alone altering the bedrock of the executive branch.
Seriously.
But even if they manage that, it still has to go to the states for ratification. You need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. Currently, that means 38 out of 50 states have to formally agree to change the Constitution. Think about trying to get 38 states to agree on what time it is, let alone agreeing to alter the presidency.
Right. It's a massive hurdle. And Pathway 2 bypasses Congress entirely. It involves a constitutional convention called by 2/3 of the state legislatures.
Wait, has a convention of states ever actually happened?
Never. It has never been successfully utilized in U.S. history because the logistical and political hurdles are just staggering. The URBT News article concludes that because of our deep entrenched national polarization, neither political party currently holds the supermajorities required in Washington, nor is there 38 states worth of consensus out in the country. Therefore, making a fourth term happen is a legal impossibility under current law.
So we are looking at a frozen constitution. The hyperpolarization of the current era has effectively welded the legal pressure valve shut, making Article V a dead letter in modern politics.
Pretty much.
But wait, I have to push back here. Given that this is a mathematical and legal impossibility, why do campaigns even bother floating the idea? Is it purely to keep the base engaged? I mean, why take the risk of alienating moderates by pushing a legally doomed concept?
Because populist movements prioritize base enthusiasm over moderate legal pedantry. Floating an impossible idea like this functions less as a legitimate legal roadmap and much more as a barometer for the nation's political health.
A barometer?
Yeah, it is a highly effective loyalty test. It asks the base, are you loyal to the traditional rules of the system or are you loyal to the vision of the leader? Ah, I see.
By keeping the legally impossible idea alive, it forces the base to constantly reaffirm their allegiance. It maximizes engagement and keeps the political momentum surging, even if the stated goal is out of reach.
So when the legal pathways are frozen, politicians rely on behavioral norm breaking to show their strength.
Exactly.
The rhetoric itself is the victory, regardless of the legislation. And that brings this entire complex web of polling, history, and constitutional law right back to you, the listener. Because ultimately, this deep dive isn't just about congressional math or the specific rhetoric of one politician.
No, it's not.
It is about your evolving relationship with executive power. You are navigating an era of rapid, profound political realignment, and you have to decide where the boundaries of that power should be drawn.
And the source material offers some highly practical advice for navigating this exact moment. If you want to cut through the noise and truly understand these dynamics, the first step is to educate yourself with primary documents.
Right. Don't just rely on headlines. Exactly. Read the actual text of the Constitution and the 22nd Amendment. Look back at the Federalist Papers, specifically Federalist Number 71, where Alexander Hamilton extensively debates the duration of the presidency and the balance between executive energy and democratic constraint.
Yeah, see the arguments as they were originally formed. The sources also advise seeking out balanced reporting that actively separates fiery political rhetoric from established constitutional law.
Right. And once you understand the foundation, take action. Contact your local representatives to share your views on the limits of executive power. And perhaps most importantly, engage in respectful, face-to-face dialogue with your friends, family, and neighbors.
Definitely.
Focus those conversations on shared constitutional principles rather than getting bogged down in the endless cycle of partisan talking points.
Because, as we saw with Sarah Jenkins and her fractured volunteer team in Ohio, these debates are not confined to cable news panels or congressional hearings. They're happening in our backyards, altering the fabric of our local communities.
They really are. And the source material leaves us with a profound conclusion that the stability of a republic depends entirely on the willingness of its citizens and its leaders to uphold the Constitution. The text on the parchment has no power on its own.
Right.
Which leads to a critical final thought for everyone to mull over. If the ultimate defense of the 22nd Amendment isn't the ink on the page, but our collective willingness to enforce it, what happens to a democracy when a large enough portion of the electorate simply decides they no longer want to uphold those specific words?
Man, it is a question that forces us to look closely at those clean lines drawn in the sand and recognize that the tide of populism might just be strong enough to wash them away. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the facts, and we'll see you next time.